I'm Julia Manchester. What's America thinking? Well, this week it's been a lot of fear and concern around immigration. From the ultimate death of the bipartisan border deal to a shocking act of violence caught on camera in Times Square. Reporting on this story from Nexstar Nation's WPIX in New York is reporter Anthony DiLorenzo. Let's take a look.
Well, it's a sore subject for the NYPD, the fact that all 5 of these suspects have been set free. Now, some are asking if those accused who are living in migrant shelters should be living in the country at all. A chorus of outrage growing from video of this shocking beatdown on NYPD cops in Times Square.
Took a swing at my lieutenant, hit him in the head. They fell to the floor. And then it just became a pile-on, a melee.
Politicians and police decrying the 8 versus 2 attack, leaving a lieutenant and officer bloodied and bruised.
Reprehensible. Cowards.
I'm disgusted by what I saw.
Mayor Adams breaking his silence exclusively on PIX 11 about the Saturday shellacking, allegedly perpetrated by a group of men the NYPD classifies as migrants, causing a disturbance.
Those who are breaking our laws, we need to re-examine the laws that don't allow us to deport them.
New York does not have the power to deport criminals, only the feds do. But there's a bipartisan bid to change removal rules. Staten Island Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis saying migrants who commit crimes here should be deported immediately and have any future immigration application denied. Governor Hochul said it's worth looking into.
If someone commits a crime against a police officer in the state of New York, and they're not, they're not here legally, definitely worth checking into.
Migrant advocates say the few committing crimes need better outlets.
Getting case managers, social workers, mental health therapists. We will see more outreach being done.
The NYPD further enraged by the leniency of a judge who set loose the 5 men arrested.
There's no consequences. And we must change this. End of story.
And Anthony DiLorenzo joins us now. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be with you.
So we know officials are outraged, but how are New Yorkers responding to the attack?
We've been speaking with people throughout the past 2 weeks now almost, and the migrant crisis really is something that has consumed New Yorkers. It's something that they are hearing about all the time, particularly because of the cost to the city. And this obviously is painting migrants in a bad light. And the mayor wants to go ahead and make sure that people know that this is just a small minority of people. 175,000 asylum seekers have arrived in the city, and we're talking about, in this case, 10 people. So for the most part, the people who we've spoken with aren't really concerned that this is going to become part of a larger trend. However, if this were not such a heavily Democratic city, you might think that it would be a little different elsewhere.
Right. And as you mentioned, you've been covering this story. Why did the New York District Attorney's Office ultimately decide to release some of the suspects without bail in the first place?
There were 4 that were released on their own recognizance. So basically, the DA looked at the evidence that they had at the time after this Saturday attack, and they really only had a short piece of video, maybe 2 minutes, that they looked at. And it was hard to identify all of these suspects because we are told that they actually switched clothing after the attack. So they see them on video, but then after it finished, some of them walked away and changed their clothing. So they wanted to make sure that they had the right people identified for the right crime. And some of the offenses, 4 of them, they determined they should not ask for bail, and they ultimately let them out. However, 1 was remanded to Rikers Island. He was just indicted yesterday, and we are likely going to see a lot of movement in this case within the next 24 hours, I'm told.
And are there any updates on the whereabouts of those suspects who reportedly fled New York after being released?
So they did hop on a bus, we know that, and they reportedly got on the bus. Someone paid for their tickets. There was some speculation yesterday that they were found by Border Patrol in Phoenix, Arizona. After some back and forth again, they were trying to identify who these people were that they had in custody. Ultimately, they determined these were not any of the suspects from this case. And we do point out, as the DA points out, that they're really allowed to go wherever they are because they have been released on their own recognizance. One of them is under supervised release, and we are told by the DA that he had checked in at one point. So they just have to be back here in the city for their arraignment, which is scheduled for March 4th, if not sooner.
So what can you tell us about the suspects who had already been arrested for prior crimes committed since coming to America?
Well, we're told by the NYPD that a lot of the people who are suspected in this beatdown of the two cops are part of a Venezuelan gang. So they are now concerned that that gang is spreading its tentacles into the United States and here in New York. And they are committing offenses, according to the NYPD, stabbings, shoplifting. You saw what happened in this video, obviously, and they're even looking at now some human trafficking patterns starting to emerge. So definitely something that they're keeping a close watch on. They have police outside a lot of the shelters, and that's exactly what the police were doing on that Saturday night, making sure that everything was safe and everyone was acting orderly. And that's ultimately what touched off this whole ordeal with the cops, because they were doing their patrols to ensure that all the people there were acting within the law.
So in terms of those police who were doing their job that night, how are they doing since being injured?
So they didn't suffer major injuries, rather. The police unions are saying that they are ultimately going to be okay, suffered some shoulder pain, some bumps and bruises. You saw how they were kicked and punched and thrown to the ground. So just injuries associated with getting into a fight. But ultimately, they will likely be back on patrol if they're not already.
So we've been watching migrants being bused and flown to New York for months now. Have you, from your perspective, seen a shift in sentiment on immigration since the influx of migrants arrived in the city?
I think this really was a pivotal moment for the sentiment. You have a lot of people who are sympathetic to the migrants and the asylum seekers here in New York City. But some people who were sympathetic to them before now are starting to rethink what exactly is happening, especially after 4 of them were released after what happened in Times Square. That is certainly an anger and a point that is causing a lot of fire among people in the city that the DA let these people out. And it seems now that he is possibly trying to, I guess, a PR blitz, really. He spoke out last week, and we expect to hear from him again to try and calm some of the anger that people are feeling here in the city. So it's definitely been a point of aggravation for some people.
Absolutely. And, New York City Mayor Eric Adams addressed the state legislature on Tuesday. What changes is he now considering?
Well, he says he wants to sit down with the city council to talk about whether they need to review the sanctuary city law that was put in place back in 2014. So it's about a decade old now. And ultimately, the mayor says he would like to see anyone who's accused of committing a violent, dangerous felony in the city to face deportation. And he wants the NYPD to start to be able to work with ICE in cases like that. But that has drawn a lot of criticism from immigration advocates. So there doesn't seem to be much appetite on the city hall to really change any of the current laws. So if the mayor says he can do so within the law, he could possibly sign an executive order to change what he wants. And right now he's sort of been at odds with the city council over some policing laws. So it'll be interesting how that all shakes out, probably soon.
The story is really emblematic of how, the immigration, situation or story nationally is happening in many of our own communities. Anthony DiLorenzo, thank you so much for breaking it down for us.
You're welcome.
There is so much going on with immigration in this country. Here to take a broader look at what's happening across the nation is Amy K. Dacey, Executive Director of the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics at American University. Amy, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so Amy, just to kick it off, you've seen the footage of that attack on NYPD officers in New York City. How do incidents like that influence Americans' feelings about immigration as a whole?
Well, I think incidents like you saw in New York certainly make people aware that immigration is not just issues that happen along the border. A lot of challenges with immigration are seen in these sanctuary cities. Nobody wants to see violence, and certainly against our public servants. So it was hard to see, but it also helps to reiterate that immigration is a national issue, and there's a lot happening in communities across the country.
So as we're seeing, these stories play out in communities across the country, there's also this overarching story of the 2024 presidential election on Capitol Hill. You have efforts to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary, as well as, efforts to try to get some sort of immigration reform passed. Not sure what that's going to look like going forward. But, are these stories that you see coming out of New York City being weaponized politically?
I think there's been a significant amount of politicalization around the immigration issue. I mean, you haven't seen major reforms since 1996, and a lot of that is because you haven't seen the two parties be able to come together to really address some of these challenges that we're seeing and can be addressed. It's an election year. I think that both parties try to find ways to figure out what are the biggest vulnerabilities for their opponents, where are the challenges that they're facing, and what's on America's minds. And I think what you've seen in exit polls from some of the early Republican primaries, what you've also seen in recent polling is that immigration is not just on the minds of people in states like New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, and along the border, but it's certainly mindful in a lot of these places across the country. And even in like a special election in New York, it seems to be playing a major part in the messaging.
Well, in New York, we saw Mayor Eric Adams address the state legislature on potential changes to sanctuary cities like New York. Here's what he said, and then I want to get your reaction.
My legal team tells me I have the authority to have cooperation with ICE for those who commit felony, dangerous crimes. That is something we would love to entertain.
So what's your reaction to that? It seems like Eric Adams has been increasingly taking a harder line approach on immigration.
Well, this is some of the best parts of the U.S. system and some of the challenging parts because we have divided government. The federal, government plays certainly a significant role in this. States and local and municipalities all play a role. And how does this come together to solve some of these problems? You've seen in a lot of major U.S. cities that crime is a huge issue. It's also a big issue. It's usually second or third behind inflation, the economy, and immigration in a lot of these places. These issues are all connected. So mayors are trying to find ways to make people feel safe, to make sure that the economy is doing well in their cities, and that also, for a lot of respects, that they have the workforce that they need, that they, are open, and a lot of these cities in a genuine way want to, for people who are seeking, to be a part of the U.S. fabric. There's a lot of reasons that immigrants come in, and it's not just for humanitarian or for some of these sanctuary issues. It's reunification with families. It's certainly for employment. So how do they balance all those things and understand that they're being asked to be responsible for a lot of these issues? And where is the funding coming for these additional types of issues on the table? You've seen with Governor Abbott, millions and millions of dollars being spent for him to even bus people out to some of these sanctuary cities. When mayors are, taking people into the cities, how do they have the resources to make sure that they can accommodate these new, members in the community? And so there's a lot at play. And so the interaction between these different layers of government matters a lot.
Speaking of these cities, one line I hear a lot with the immigration debate in this country is every town is a border town. Can you speak to the struggles that sanctuary cities and border towns are facing right now?
Sure. Well, there is an influx of people who want to be a part of this country for the reasons that I mentioned, before. When they, the way some of the system is set up now is that they're funneled to these sanctuary cities. Cities like New York, Chicago, LA, they have to find the resources to accommodate them, to process them. I think a lot that goes with this bill that, Democrats and some Republicans are trying to move through the Senate and through the House addresses some of these issues. Certainly it provides additional visas, talks about the ability to get employment early on, to how do they process in some of these sanctuary cities. So trying to find some of that relief. But you're finding communities all over the country that are seeing influx of immigrants, how the community can provide for them. And so it's becoming not just something that's happening and around along the border. And again, like I said, you see a lot of these exit polls. It's on voters' minds across the country as well.
So it's on voters' minds across the country, but we see failure after failure to address, immigration reform on Capitol Hill at the federal level. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how Americans are feeling about the border crisis and Washington's complete inability to get anything done. How are Americans responding to that?
Well, I think you see this frustration, for people and why we've done a lot of research here at the Sine Institute to talk about 18 to 34-year-olds and their problems with institutions and with government. There seems to be a general frustration. Why can't people come together to solve these issues and solve these problems when that's their job? That's what they were hired to do. So I think what you'll see is the inability to have, the Senate and House come together with some of these, issues around this immigration bill. Again, I think the messaging that will come out of that will be politicized as well. Is it going to be, the Republicans just were inefficient, wouldn't want to act and politicize the issue? Was the Biden administration and Democrats trying to meet people halfway, and there was an inability, for people to come together to solve these problems? I think people are frustrated. They want to see their government work for them. And when they see these things politicized and when people are more concerned about being in leadership positions and actually solving some of these policy issues, this is why you see sometimes, a struggle to get people to come to vote, to be engaged, because they are frustrated oftentimes with government and how it's working.
So who do you think is best positioned to tackle immigration issues? Is it at the state level or at the federal government?
I wish you could say it's one or the other, but it's just simply not. I think what you have to see is you definitely need to see action at the federal level. There's some things that can happen there that would help support local communities and support various states. I think that's the big challenge. It's not unlike some of the biggest nationwide problems that we face between COVID and, some of these other issues with the economy and inflation. There's borders all across our country, and these states have to come together. These local communities have to come together. There's things that the federal government can do, especially with funding, especially with setting some parameters around how to process things faster, how to put more resources, for public servants at the border and others to process and make sure that the system works and flows well. But then there's also cities that have to decide how are they going to accommodate, for immigrants. And there's so many positives that have come, from immigration throughout the decades. It's in the fabric of our country. People who are coming for reasons, yes, again, to seek asylum. There is definitely something about being in the United States and the freedoms that we enjoy, but it's also the workforce of the future in the United States will count on immigration. And then how do we bring families together that have been separated? So all of these issues can't be handled by one level of government. They're going to need to come together. And again, I think some of the frustration you see with governors and some of these mayors that are dealing in sanctuary cities for this inaction at the federal level and the challenges we've been seeing this week on Capitol Hill.
It's really a challenging issue, and we saw it, just this week, like you said, on Capitol Hill. Amy Dacey from AU Sine Institute, thank you so much for breaking it down for us, and always a pleasure to see a fellow Eagle from American University.
And we hope to see you on campus soon.
Thank you. Before we leave this topic, let's do a deep dive into the actual statistics on crimes committed by immigrants in the U.S. The Hill staff writer and immigration reporter Rafael Bernal has been crunching the numbers, and you might be surprised by what he's discovered. Let's take a look.
In the wake of a brawl between migrants and police officers, New York City Police Commissioner Edward Caban on Monday warned of a wave of migrant crime washing over the city. New York Democratic Congressman Adriano Espaillat told me this about Caban's analysis. I disagree. This isn't a political rivalry. That's Espaillat standing next to Caban at his swearing in. So who's right? There's little evidence of any sort of crime wave in New York City. The city's statistics show crime generally dropped even as the migrant shelter crisis grew. And that tracks with what we know about immigrants and crime nationwide. One metric on immigrant crime is how many people have been arrested by ICE. ICE made 170,590 arrests in fiscal 2023, 96,768 of which were made over immigration offenses, not crime. With that number sounds big, think of this. That's out of 45 million foreign nationals in the United States. About 1 arrest for every 265 people. But that's not the best metric. Some law enforcement agencies don't alert ICE when they pick up foreign nationals for minor crimes, so ICE's numbers can't account for every single crime committed by a foreign national. And law enforcement doesn't always register immigration status when making an arrest. Luckily for us, the Cato Institute in 2021 looked at numbers from the Texas Department of Public Safety, which does input immigration status for every arrest and conviction. Cato's findings side with Espaillat. In 2019, the conviction rate for undocumented immigrants was 37.1%, lower than that of native-born U.S. citizens in Texas. Immigrants with papers were even less likely to commit crimes. Their conviction rate was 57.2% below the native-born. And that tracks historically, too. A Stanford study last year found that the last time foreign nationals had higher incarceration rates than the native-born was in 1880.
Every week, it feels like the presidential election could take a different turn, from swaying polls to court cases. And Trump continues to be front and center from the shifting campaign trail. Just yesterday, the former president was told he is not immune from prosecution related to crimes he has been accused of committing during his time in office. This is a significant moment for Trump's legal cases. What could the fallout be if he is ultimately convicted? It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, it's always good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So, Scott, a recent CNN poll found that half of Americans say it's essential that a verdict is reached before the 2024 election. Could this be the case that closes the door to the White House for former President Trump?
It's certainly keeping him and his team up at night. And again, that corroborates some of the other polling we've talked about on your show about how if he's convicted, there's anywhere from 5 to 15% of independent voters who would seriously vote or seriously consider not voting for him in the general. I mean, these convictions, these court cases, this is something that America certainly cares about, and the data proves it.
Moving to Capitol Hill, in a major blow to Speaker Mike Johnson, 3 GOP members of the House voted against impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, plus a standalone bill to fund Israel was torpedoed by Democrats. Is this a sign of hard times to come for the Republican-controlled House?
You know what it is, and in another life, I used to work in Congress. In fact, full disclosure, Rep. Ken Calvert, the person who introduced the Israeli bill, I used to work for him. And I remember back in the day when I worked in the Hill, you never put a bill on the floor, especially a big one like that, unless you knew it was going to pass. And I think the most interesting thing to come out of the Mayorkas impeachment is Rep. Gallagher said it pretty honestly. He's like, the leadership has known that I was a no vote for a month. And so I think, yes, this pertains to what is in the future. I mean, we've got the budget stuff coming up in a few weeks. And you know what? The polling shows that Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they don't like the fact that Congress can't get anything done, whether it's on the border, whether it's on Israeli aid, whether it's on Ukraine aid, whether it's on the budget. So I see some, I see some problems ahead, and I don't know that it's going to help any of these candidates at the ballot box as we get into primary season.
I guess you could say it's Speaker Johnson really learning on the job there in that vote. But looking ahead to the South Carolina primaries, Decision Desk has Haley trailing by just over 30%. Why is she staying at the race at this point, and could she be waiting for Trump's legal cases to play out?
So I think to answer your second question first, I think she is waiting to see where the legal challenges weigh out. And more importantly, we saw what she raised in January. She reported $16 million raised, which is more than the cash on hand she had when she started January. So there's clearly some momentum about her behind her coming out of the January showing, 3rd in Iowa, 2nd in New Hampshire. It was a funny blow on Twitter and all social media when she came in 2nd to none of the above. What's interesting is the way Nevada goes, and I don't want to put anyone to sleep, last night's vote didn't really matter in terms of delegate. It's really going to be tomorrow's caucus in Nevada that awards delegates, and she's already said she's not going to compete in that. So by and large, Nevada doesn't really matter other than it's, funny for Twitter, funny for social media. That South Carolina number you showed is really what's it's gonna make or break her. I don't think she's gonna win, but can she beat expectations and continue that fundraising so that she can keep it on until Super Tuesday? That'll be the question. But she's certainly banking on the fact that, you know, a lot of voters are out there saying, hey, if Donald Trump gets convicted or if he somehow his legal troubles get more serious, they would reconsider. And that CNN poll that shows, you know, 53%. That's nothing to ignore there. She's got a lot of good data points and a lot of good money behind her, but that we'll see if that's enough.
Yeah, she raised $16 million in January alone, so that's certainly some successful fundraising. If you put Haley up against Biden, right now 53% of likely voters say they would pick Haley, with the current president only snagging 45%. Could these numbers also be motivation for Haley to stick it out?
Absolutely. You know, and that's the YouGov national poll. When we start looking at the crosstabs in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nikki Haley plays very well against suburban middle class voters, specifically women, a section or a subsection of voters that Donald Trump doesn't do well with, and are certainly swayable both on the independent Republican and Democratic side. You know, she scratches that itch and she's a very viable candidate. And that poll just kind of shows it, especially when you get down into the nitty gritty in some of these states, which is really how this is won, not at the national level. It's in these battleground suburbs in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona.
But assuming it ends up being Biden versus Trump on the ticket, neither have high ranks among voters. They're essentially tied in decision desks' favorable ratings. Could this affect voter turnout, especially among those independents we talk about?
Absolutely, right? And we kind of saw it last night in Nevada, right? None of the above candidates won. That means that there are voters who said, you know what? I'm actually going to show up. I'm going to go to my voting place. I'm going to stand in line. I'm going to fill out a ballot. I'm not going to vote for any names on the ballot. I'm going to vote for none of the above. And I think that's a mark, an indication of what the rest of America thinks. And I don't necessarily think that most voters like who their choices are. And that approval rating you just showed up there kind of is the data that proves that. Either candidate's going to have to see that rise up if they're going to overcome some potential turnout problems this fall.
Moving to the current president's campaign, Bidenomics continues to be a top push for his reelection campaign. He has gotten a small boost in the past few months, gaining 4% on his approvaling of the handling of the economy. But looking at the past few weeks, his overall approval rating has dropped. What other factors are at play here?
I think it's perception of the economy, right? We have been reading about more and more layoffs in the tech sector. So this isn't the blue collar jobs or some of the service jobs that we saw at the beginning of COVID. These are some of the high 5, low 6-figure jobs among the 25 to 35-year-old crowd. And it is affecting not hundreds, but tens of thousands of people at big brand name companies like Amazon and Meta and PayPal and Salesforce. And that reverberates throughout the economy. I think that's what you're seeing here is the economy. You know, some people are thinking it's getting better, but that's not necessarily translating to Biden's bottom line.
And that's frustrating for the current president, for sure. We talked a little bit about this earlier in the show, but Nevada just held its primary without Trump on the ballot. The caucus is tomorrow. That doesn't include Nikki Haley. But what happened and why in the primary last night, if you could go into more detail on that?
Yeah, so it's a lot of drama. It could be a reality show around how the Nevada GOP operates and how they choose their candidates. Nevada as a state has to run a primary, so they ran it last night. But the Nevada GOP said, fine, if the state is gonna run a primary, you can run it. You can have candidates can apply there, but we're only gonna award our delegates to the people who actually caucus with us. And so while there was an election last night, and it was state run, it was official, those results are real, those voters are real, and none of the above won. Haley came in second. Donald Trump decided not to run in that one. He decided to run in the caucus that is being run by the state party tomorrow. And the reason why he decided on that one is because that's where the delegates are awarded. Nikki Haley decided not to participate in that one, so she won't be on the ballot. But what you're looking at there is some internal turmoil, internal drama in the Republican National Party, and it's interesting to watch. But the only thing of consequence is the delegates are awarded tomorrow. Nikki Haley's not eligible for any of them. It looks like Donald Trump's going to get all of them.
And that's only going to boost him going further. Scott Tranter, Thank you for joining us from a beautiful Washington, D.C. skyline.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. That's it for What's America Thinking. Come back next time. I'm Julia Manchester, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. Also, we want to hear from you. Leave your comments and let us know what has you fired up in your region of the country.